Morning once again, and happy Sabbath. It's so good to be with you once again. Helen made me think about Vacation Bible School, and Ethan. We were in the swimming pool yesterday at our neighbor's swimming pool. We are frequent flyers in their swimming pool as they have no children. They got lots of grandkids, and he loves to swim. It was 2 times yesterday. And I told you guys the story about the airplane, and he thought they were going on an airplane and the whole 9 yards. And so I had to arrange to get him a flight with my best friend from work that is retired now. He has an airplane, and so we're making arrangements. Once the heat breaks, he's going to take Ethan up in his airplane. But yesterday we were in the swimming pool, and a helicopter came over multiple times. I think they were looking for something because it looked like a police helicopter. And so they were kind of zigzagging and coming over and over and over. And after about the 3rd time, Ethan said that Helen needs to arrange to have a helicopter come over next year. So you got your work cut out for you. So last week we talked about Solomon, and Solomon discussed or shared with us 7 sins that God hates. And we reviewed all 7 of those. And I want to be clear, those aren't exhaustive. I mentioned that in the sermon, but they're not the only sins that God hates. But they were ones that God felt the need to call out specifically. And he warned us of how dangerous those sins were and how they would ultimately lead to our destruction. So this morning I want to dig into one of those sins a little bit deeper. It's an opportunity for me to build on a previous message. I don't get that opportunity because I don't preach as often, and sometimes it's hard to do continuation messages. Well, this is an opportunity to do that. This is really an expansion of last week's message. The rudder of your life. What's a rudder? Yeah, guides a boat, right? Steers a boat. The Bible... What's the number one theme in the Bible or illustration is agriculture. I've talked about that in a lot of sermons. But close behind that is sailing and fishing, right? Well, because those were big things in that time. And so it was things that people could relate to. And so Jesus often uses agriculture or fishing and sailing as illustrations so people could relate to them. So as you think about that, this is one of those times when a Bible writer actually uses that illustration in his lessons or his discussion with us. And you'll see as I get further into the lesson where that comes to bear. How many of you this morning came to church with a weapon? Oh man, somebody went to raise their hand and they dropped it. And I see one person raising their hand. Well, as we get into this lesson and as we finish this lesson, you will realize that every single one of us came to church today with a powerful weapon. So Betty Ann got the answer right. It's a weapon that can be used for good or evil. And the Bible spends a massive amount of time talking about this, because it's so powerful, for good and bad. Now, early on in his writing, James wrote that those that are practicing true, pure, and undefiled religion before God do something. They do something. They demonstrate that. Let's go to James. Let's start in James chapter 1. Home base is going to be James chapter 3. And we're going to focus on James chapter 3, verse 1 through 12 for the study, but we're going to start off, I want to give a little context. James chapter 1, verse 26. I'm reading from the King James Version. If any man among you seem to be religious, and bridleth not his tongue, but deceiveth his own heart, this man's religion is vain. In other words, James is saying that if you truly are a Christian, you truly are practicing true and pure and undefiled, you will bridle your tongue. Bridle your tongue. Well, then James continues, and the next few messages in James are about choosing the right path and practicing godliness that is pleasing to Jesus. In fact, that's the heart of James's book. So today, as I said, we're going to focus on James chapter 3, verse 1 through 12. And he's going to teach us that we all possess a dangerous weapon. A dangerous weapon. Each of us are born with an instrument that can do great damage or great good. James is going to teach us how to use our tongues. How to use our tongues. Now, in James chapter 3, he starts off in verse 1 and 2 talking about the serious responsibility of words. James chapter 3, verse 1 and 2. My brethren, be not many masters. Some translations will say teachers. Knowing that we shall receive the greater condemnation, for in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, the same is a perfect man, and able to bridle the whole tongue. Now, this first warning James gives is actually quite surprising. James says that many people should not become masters or teachers. In other words, leaders or teachers. Now, doesn't that seem kind of counterintuitive a little bit? Yeah, because why would James say that Christians should rethink or think hard about being a teacher? Aren't we all supposed to be teachers? Now, James is not saying that no one should be a teacher because there would be no one to share the gospel. Amen? In fact, the Apostle Paul tells us that God gave shepherds and evangelists and teachers for equipping of the saints. Brothers and sisters, God wants teachers. I think we can infer what was going on in James's time. I think there were Christians in James's time that were saying, why isn't it my turn to be a teacher? Why can't I do that? I should be a master, a leader, a teacher. You see, my friends, I think that in those times, just as today, there are people who think that teachers hold this glorious position of honor and power. And they do. But many people espouse to that for the wrong reason. They see it as an opportunity to stand in front of the group. And they see that for personal glory, not for the true heart of teaching. My friends, James begins with a warning in this passage that is often overlooked. He's basically asking you, careful what you wish for. Do you want to be more strictly judged? Are you prepared to be judged with greater standards? The Bible's very clear. It's true that Christians who are teachers are judged strictly. But that's not really what James is talking about. James is talking about God's judgment. We judge leaders and teachers very strictly as humans, don't we? We put them on a pedestal and then we tear them down. That's not what James is talking about. James is talking about God's standard, God's judgment. Will teachers be judged with greater strictness? Yeah. James explains in verse 2, and the sentence, if you notice, let's go to verse 2, it starts with the word for. It starts with the word for. For in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, the same is a perfect man, and also able to bridle the whole body. He's showing us that he is explaining this to us by starting with the word for. The reason teachers will be judged with a stricter judgment is because we all stumble in many ways. And one of those ways we stumble is in words. Now, my friends, we have many weaknesses, many points of failing
Many points of falling short of God's desire and will. But one of the ways in which we stumble is in the way we talk. Our words. And the implication from James is clear. What do teachers do more of than normal people? Talk. Talk. You're all laughing because you're like, Dan, you love to talk. Which means there's a magnifying glass on those that talk more and more and more. Therefore, teachers will be under a stricter judgment because they'll have to say many more words than those that are not teachers. It just stands to reason. Now, James is not saying, and I'm not saying, that teachers will be judged differently. It's that teachers speak more than those who don't teach, and therefore they're going to have more words to be judged. It's mathematics, statistics. And words have weight. Words have weight. Think about it. Teachers influence lives and shape minds. The more authority you carry, the more accountability your words carry. Or should. Parents, pastors, teachers, we must measure our words carefully. You see, my friends, James is reminding us that everyone struggles with speech. Everyone struggles with the words that they share. Verse 2 also shares James's attitude about the tongue. It says, "For in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in the word, the same is a perfect man, and able to bridle the whole body." James is saying we stumble in many ways. But in this instance, James is leveling the field. He's putting us all on the same level by saying nobody has a perfect mouth. Notice how he does it is he says, if you can control your tongue, you're perfect. And he goes to tear down, none of us perfect. But the person who can control or bridle their tongue, according to the Bible, is a mature Christian. You see, my friends, James's point is that controlling our tongues is difficult. The person who can control their tongue has clearly demonstrated spiritual control over it. James is actually showing us a broader lesson, or teaching us a broader lesson, that an example of spiritual maturity is self-discipline. Self-discipline. And self-discipline in regards to one's speech is rare. While it's commanded, James observes how very rarely it's observed. Let's go back to James chapter 3. James chapter 3, I'm going to read verses 3 through 5. "Behold, we put bits in the horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn about their whole body. Behold, also the ships, which though they be so great and are driven by fierce winds, yet are they turned about with a very small helm, whithersoever the governor listeth. Even so the tongue is a little member and boasteth great things. Behold, how great a matter a little fire kindleth." You see, in this passage, James uses some simple illustrations to punctuate how powerful the tongue is. He explains why it must be controlled. James is very clear, though. The tongue is an important part of our bodies. Very important. And he uses these three illustrations to show us what the tongue is like and why it must be controlled. The first one, in verse 3, he uses an example of a bit in a horse's mouth. A bit. Now, I know Nicole knows what a bit in a horse's mouth is, right? Horses obey their riders because the bit is put in their mouths and the riders pull the reins so the bit can move the horse. It's like the steering wheel, right? The bit is what riders use to control the whole body of the horse. My friends, this is an important observation that James is making when he uses the example of a bit controlling the body. Anybody know how much a Clydesdale horse can weigh? Up to 2,000 pounds.
Yet a child can lead a 2,000-pound horse with a tiny bit in its mouth. That small bit will decide whether that horse runs wild or is under control. Just a small bit controls and steers a large horse. Just as that little bit can control this big animal, your tongue steers your body. That's what James is trying to say. You see, my friends, your tongue is the bit of your life. Where your words go, your heart and your body follow. And when God controls your words, He controls your direction. That's what James is saying in that illustration. In verse 4, he uses the rudder of a ship. And that's why I chose the title of the sermon, The Rudder of Your Life. See, my friends, large ships are driven by strong waves and winds and even powerful engines. However, though the ship is tossed about by the winds, a very small rudder guides its direction. It's similar to the first illustration. It's similar to the bit of a horse's mouth. You remember, James implied that the rider of the horse can control the animal. Now, James expressly states that the pilot of the ship has control over it by the rudder, by this little, small item. In both illustrations, James is telling us that someone has control over the whole body. Everybody's heard of the RMS Titanic? Amen? The RMS Titanic was over 800 feet long. Over 46,000 tons. It was steered by a rudder a fraction of the size of that huge boat. That boat could change course. It took some time, but only if it was steered early enough. I want you to think about that. A small rudder makes a huge ship turn where the pilot chooses. You see, my friends, even though your words may seem small, they direct the course of your relationships, your marriage, your reputation, your career, your witness, and even your salvation or destruction. James's advice is start steering now before you run into the iceberg. Adventist Home, page 391, Ellen White wrote, "The getting of treasures by a lying tongue is a vanity, tossed to and fro of them that seek death." Tossed to and fro. Once again, she's using a sailing metaphor. And the third illustration in verse 5. The final illustration is how a small fire can set ablaze a great forest. Well, my friends, we see this all the time right now. You know, think about California. A little bitty spark, and next thing you know, half the state's on fire. You know, how much of Canada's on fire, and how many of those were just little, small, careless uses of fire that set the whole area on fire? Just a few years ago, there was a fire outside of San Diego that they thought was going to race to the sea. It started with a careless campfire. (1871), a small fire in a barn. Started by a cow kicking over a lantern. Led to the Great Chicago Fire. It destroyed over 17,000 buildings. Left 100,000 people homeless. One small spark, devastating consequences. My friends, our own ancestors here in Michigan felt that because our trees and our forests nearly single-handedly rebuilt Chicago. You see, my friends, the fire illustration adds one more dimension to James' teaching.
A small fire can be a destructive and damaging thing. One careless moment, one lie, one rumor can spark a relational or spiritual wildfire. You see, my friends, I want you to remember this. Words don't need volume to do damage, just placement and timing. The conclusion of this is actually at the beginning of verse 5. James says that the tongue is a small member, but it boasts of great things. You see, the tongue is small, but it gets us into a lot of trouble, doesn't it? It actually gets us into far more trouble than our feet and our hands. A modern comparison would be that our tongues are like a steering wheel. Small, but it controls where we go. James wants us to know that if we can master our words, if we can master our tongues, we can master our lives. In other words, winning the battle of the tongue can go a long ways to winning all the battles. But in order to win this battle, it requires something. It requires a change of heart. Jesus taught us that it is the overflow of the heart that the mouth speaks. Turn with me to Matthew chapter 12. Matthew chapter 12, verse 33 through 35. Either make the tree good and his fruit good, or else make the tree corrupt and his fruit corrupt. For the tree is known by his fruit. O generation of vipers, how can ye, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh. A good man out of the good treasure of the heart bringeth forth good things, and an evil man out of the evil treasure bringeth forth evil things. But I say unto you that every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account therefore in the day of the judgment. You see, my friends, we can't simply think we can change our words and that will be the end of the story. We must change our hearts so that we can truly control our tongues. By controlling the tongue, we will exercise greater mastery over the other members of our body. James then talks about the danger of an untamed tongue. Let's go back to James chapter 3. Verse 6. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members, that it defileth the whole body, and setteth on fire the course of nature, and it is set on the fire of hell. For every kind of beast, and of birds, and of serpents, and of the things of the sea is tamed, and hath been tamed of mankind. But the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil full of deadly poison. James' second point is why we actually need to control our tongues. The second reason is that while the tongue is small, it has a very destructive power. He says the tongue is fire, with the power to set fire to everything around us, to set fire to our relationships. A single word of gossip, slander, or deception can burn down trust, burn down relationships. You see, my friends, words can heal, but they can also destroy. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 21 says, the tongue has the power of life and death. You see, as we reflect on the concept of the tongue as a weapon, it becomes clear that our words carry immense power. They can uplift, they can inspire, they can heal, but they can also cause harm and destruction. Now, verse 6 is a very complex verse when read in the Greek. In fact, I think one of the best translations of it is in the New English translation. In the New English translation, verse 6 says, and the tongue is a fire. The tongue represents the world of wrongdoing among the parts of our bodies. It pollutes the entire body and sets fire to the course of human existence and is set on fire by hell.
That's a pretty good translation. Counsels for the Church, page 176, Ellen White wrote, "The tongue that delights in mischief, the babbling tongue that says, 'Report, and I will report it,' is declared by the Apostle James to be set on fire by hell. It scatters firebrands on every side. What cares the vendor of gossip that he defames the innocent? He will not stay his evil work, though he destroy hope and courage in those who are already sinking under their burdens. He cares only to indulge his scandal-loving propensity. Even professed Christians close their eyes to all that is pure, honest, noble, and lovely, and treasure up what is ever objectionable and disagreeable, and publish it to the world." My friends, Ellen White was writing to all of us, not just those people. You see, my friends, not only does the tongue corrupt the whole person, but it also wreaks havoc through our lives. Careless words destroy relationships, destroy lives. We hurt feelings. We ruin relationships. But the Bible's very clear. We also ruin our own lives. We get ourselves into all sorts of trouble because, as James says in chapter 1, verse 19, we're slow to speak. Or I'm sorry, we're not slow to speak. Yeah, that wouldn't make sense if we were slow to speak. I wish I was more slow to speak. James says that the tongue pollutes the entire body. You see, we need to know, we need to acknowledge that our tongues are corrupting us. The words that we say can corrupt our hearts. When we speak filthy and crude languages, we are polluting our hearts. We are polluting our thinking. James's point is that our tongue controls our whole body. And when our tongues are foul and filthy and are not godly, then our bodies are going to follow along. And when we gossip and speak malicious words, we become ugly people with dark hearts. When we slander people, we expose our cold hearts. Our words darken our hearts and endanger our soul. You see, my friends, words damage people. Our words and our tongues set fire to the human existence. And this cycle just keeps going and going from generation to generation. And with the advent of technology, it's gotten far worse because it's easy and it's quicker and it's anonymous. James shares with us some irony in verses 7 and 8. He says, "For every kind of beast and of birds and of serpents and of things in the sea is tamed and hath been tamed of mankind, but the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison." He's basically saying that we've been able to tame nature, but we can't tame our own little tongue. That's what he's saying. He's telling us that it's untamable without divine help. He said, humans have been able to tame all kinds of wild animals and birds, but why can't we tame our tongues? He says the tongue is far more difficult to tame than those animals. He also says that the tongue is restless and poisonous. In fact, James compares it to a deadly poison like venom from a snake. Has anybody ever heard of the black mamba? Yeah, just a single drop of black mamba venom can kill an adult human. Now, the bite at first might not hurt. You might not even know you got bit. But you're going to know in a hurry because you're going to die. My friends, we may flatter in public, but we often criticize in private. Gossip and slander may seem harmless at the moment, but like venom, it spreads and poisons the heart, both of the speaker and of the hearer. And this thought reveals the final point that James was trying to make, that human effort alone cannot fix the tongue. Turn me to Psalms chapter 141, today's call to worship.
Psalm 141, I'm going to read verse 3. Set a watch, O Lord, before my mouth. Keep the door of my lips. David says that he needs the Lord to protect his words because he can't do it on his own. My friends, it's not a self-help issue. You can't listen to 12 tapes and fix this problem because it's a heart issue. As we read in Matthew chapter 12, verse 34, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Those are Jesus' words. He says, whatever your heart has in it is going to come out of your mouth. The final point I want to make is the hypocrisy of the tongue. Let's go back to James chapter 3. Verse 9. 9 through 12. Therewith bless we God, even the Father, and therewith curse we men, which are made after the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceedeth blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not so to be. Doth a fountain send forth the same place sweet water and bitter? Can the fig tree, my brethren, bear olive berries, either a vine or figs? So can no fountain both yield salt water and fresh. James says that inconsistency reveals conflict in your heart. He notices, or he calls out how inconsistent we are with our tongues. With our tongues we bless the Lord, but then we curse people that were made in his image. Think about that. We bless the Lord with our words, and then we curse people that the Lord made. From the same mouth flows blessings and curses. And how is this possible? Why do we even do this? One moment we can be saying the most beautiful, upbuilding words, and the next moment tear a person down with our words. How can we sing on Sabbath and gossip on Monday? My friends, praise and poison should not flow from the same spring. Imagine walking up to a mirror every morning and seeing a different face. Sometimes kind, sometimes angry, sometimes bitter, sometimes joyful. Wouldn't you question what's really going on if that's what you saw? You see, my friends, your tongue reflects your inner condition. If your speech constantly contradicts your praise, it's time to examine your heart, not just your habits. My friends, there's a small, brief phrase in verse 10 that are powerful. James says, my brethren, these things ought not to be so. He's saying this is just plain wrong. He actually is making a connection back to chapter 1, verse 8. He's talking about a double-minded person. He's talking about a person who's not fully dependent upon Jesus. He's talking about a person who hasn't surrendered their tongues to Jesus. He is talking about a person who has not bridled their tongues. We just speak our minds. My friends, I'm guilty of that. My brain works far too fast and my tongue responds way too quick. It's a gift, but it's also a powerful weapon. We cannot be God-focused and have a critical, filthy, or impure tongue. Our words of worship should condemn our consciences for all the things we ever used our mouths for. How is it that we, with our mouths, can say the words of praise to God after saying the kinds of things we said about people yesterday? How can our mouths claim Jesus to be Lord when last week we said all kinds of improper things? Turn me to Ephesians chapter 4. Verse 29. Let no corrupt communications proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying, that it may minister grace unto the hearers. How much communication? None. Let no communication. In verses 11 and 12, James uses nature as an example. I would argue that verses 11 and 12 drive a stake into our hearts. It says a spring cannot pour out fresh water and salt water. A fig tree cannot bear olives. A grapevine cannot produce figs. A salt pond cannot yield fresh water. You say, well, wait a minute, Dan. What is the point of all those examples? James is saying that a disciple cannot have a mouth that speaks curses, hurtful words, inconsiderate words, impure words, or words that do not build up. James' implication is clear. Springs do not produce fresh water and salt water simultaneously. And Christians, true Christians, do not speak blessings and curses. Fig trees do not bear olives, and Christians do not allow their tongues to go unchecked or uncontrolled. Our fruit reveals our roots. If our words are bitter, our hearts are not healthy. As I get ready to close, I want to tell you a little story. A man once told a harsh lie about a friend, then later regretted it. He asked a wise mentor how to make it right. The mentor told him to cut open a pillow and let the feathers fly into the wind. After he did, the mentor said, "Now go and gather every feather." The man said, "That's impossible." And the mentor said, "So it is with your words." So it is with your words. Ellen White wrote in Adventist Home, page 404, "Those who would have that wisdom which is from God must become fools in the sinful knowledge of this age in order to be wise. They should shut their eyes that they may see and learn no evil. They should close their ears lest they hear that which is evil and obtain knowledge which would stain their purity of thoughts and acts. And they should guard their tongues, lest they utter corrupt communications and guile be found in their mouths." Unquote. My friends, as you leave here today, please reflect. We must recognize the power of the tongue. How many of you came here today with a powerful weapon to church? Every single hand should go up. The tongue directs like a rudder. It destroys like a fire, and it defiles like poison. But under God's control, it can build, it can bless, it can bring life. True Christians practicing saving faith will control their tongues. My friends, has it been clear today? Amen. Please join me in singing the closing hymn, number 2.